And now I would like to introduce you to our moderator for the next panel, Merav Harel, which has a lot of experience in investments, in trading infrastructure, banking, and blockchain, helping us a lot at the embassy. So,
thank you. Hi, everybody. Does this work? Okay, hi, everybody. I'd like to introduce our panelists, please. The first one is Ido Cédric, right here. Oh, yeah, here. And Mattia Weissel. And Dr. Okay, so hi everybody. Can you hear me properly? I can't hear. Is the microphone? Can you hear me through the microphone? Do I need a microphone? Okay, so it's got to with the microphone. Okay, so hi. Thank you for joining us. We're going to be talking a little bit about insights about this regulatory system. And I'd like each of our panelists to start out by introducing themselves.
I'm a lawyer in Zurich, in the law firm Zurich Legal, head of the disruptive technology practice. That is something quite new. Historically, I've been a very normal, old economy banking and finance lawyer. I still have clients in that field. And in the disruption field, we will see later on, there's a lot of regulation going on, not only for fintech firms, but obviously for the question of how do you qualify tokens, what do the tokens actually represent, how do they work on the blockchain. And so this has sort of become like my second and new home as a lawyer. And I'm very happy to be here to share my experiences.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Matthias Weissel. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Verum Capital. I would say that I would rather represent the industry here in this panel. What do we do at Verum Capital? We are an end-to-end blockchain advisory from start to finish. We provide investment banking services from digital IPOs, ICOs, security token offerings, and so on. We provide M&A services. We provide fund tokenization services for Swiss global banks and also education. So I think we have a very broad spectrum, and we try to really professionalize the blockchain market.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. My name is Ido Cédric.
This one works for sure.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. I can hear myself. My name is Ido Sademan, and I'm the founder of Saga, the Saga Foundation. Saga is a project to create a new global digital currency, blockchain-based, but one that complements existing currencies rather than the anarchistic zeal of trying to replace them, and trying to address at the same time three major obstacles that current contenders to currencies are facing, which is a solid monetary policy for volatility taming, being non-anonymous and addressing public policy concerns in regards to KYC and AML, which have typically been a barrier to the adoption, to wide adoption of such currencies. And the third issue is the issue of governance. When monetary policy needs to be changed, who takes the decision, how decentralized is it, and how efficient it is?
Okay, thank you all. And for those who have not yet met me, I'm Merav Harel. I'm the former acting COO of Bancor. For 7 years, I also come from the traditional part of banking. For 7 years, I managed the business development of Lumitrade, one of the biggest security trading websites in Israel. And originally, I'm actually a programmer, and then I moved into becoming an investment consultant. And I'm going to ask the first question from you, Katrina, okay, if that's okay. What does Switzerland, from your point of view, bring, I'd say, from the regulatory side to startups in the blockchain field? And how does Switzerland, I'd say, bring an infrastructure that allows them to grow and prosper in this area?
Well, you've heard a lot about the regulatory environment in the first part, the stability which Switzerland brings. Maybe it's important to go down into the practicalities of the regulatory environment. So what has happened for players who have been on the Swiss market for quite some time is that we have been able to be in a quite close dialogue, in particular with FINMA, which is our financial market regulator, on individual cases. You can get case rulings, as a lot of you have maybe heard, which have allowed us sort of to build up a library of cases so that we can, if new cases come in, we can basically use the existing case law to understand how the tokens will be treated, because I think that is the main issue at the moment, but at the same time I think that is the main strength of Switzerland. So if you talk to the clients who come to us, the first reason they come to us is because they believe that we have a regulation which is understood, and that is thanks to the case law which has been existing. It is not public case law, so FINMA doesn't publish the decisions they have taken, but it is case law which each individual law firm, for example, or the different service providers in general have on these cases, which gives you a certainty. And Yael, in his introduction, he said that there is a fast tracking possibility. The fast track is if you have a case which has already been ruled, and where we have a ruling and we can say this will apply in the same way to this new case, then you don't have to go to FINMA. Then we don't need a new ruling from FINMA. We can rely on what has already been said in past cases. That is the fast track. On the other side, if you come with a highly ingenious project which has never gone to FINMA, it does make sense to then get this ruling, and unfortunately that does take time. But once you have that ruling, you know that you're on the safe side, which is good. Likewise, we also have rulings for the taxes, which also helps you. Tax rulings can be received both on cantonal, communal, and on federal level, so that your environment, which you then have set up in Switzerland, has quite a long duration of certainty. And maybe talk about the infrastructure. I think the last element, which maybe hasn't been stressed so far, is the vibrant scene which you will find in Switzerland. So no matter whether it is in the French-speaking part or in the German-speaking part, but if you, for example, go to the blockchain hub in Zurich, Trust Square, you will find a lot of firms, a lot of like-minded people, a lot of discussions going on, and I think that is one of the things which sets us apart. If you go to a conference in London, the conference will be smaller than the conference in Switzerland, just because we've got many more people in Switzerland who are in that blockchain hub. That also means that the service providers which you're going to meet often are engaged themselves in blockchain, so they have a strong, they're engaged and also emotionally excited about your projects, to hear more, to learn more, and I think that's an added value.
Thank you. The next question is for you, Matthias. I think that we're kind of seeing a shift in the type of blockchain projects that are being created right now. And I wanted to ask you, what trends have you seen happening until now, and where do you see things going from now and on?
Thank you. I think 2017 everybody was shooting for the moon. 2018 has finally brought us back down to earth, which was a very, very vital thing for this industry to sustain in the long run. I think what we've seen, it's important now to look back at 2017 and understand what has actually happened. What have we invested in? What have we lost now? And what has really happened is that 86% of all these projects that we've seen are now being traded below their listing price. I think this is important to understand. 30% of all these projects in 2017 are now worthless. They're at zero. 29% of these projects that we've seen out there are really, first of all, they did not create any value at first. And now there's only 29% out there that have a minimum viable product or a prototype. The other 70% have a vision, but that vision is not going anywhere. So we have to be very realistic. And then also, the top 10% of all blockchain projects make up of 99% of the entire value that's been created. So what is really going on with the other 90% here? So we just have to be realistic. And the top 10% of all these blockchain projects are focusing on developing new code, developing the infrastructure of blockchain projects. So obviously in 2017 we saw utility tokens. Utility tokens gave every person that participated in here the potential upside, the potential dream to become a millionaire overnight, which is very unprofessional. And now we're shifting towards security token, and security tokens finally have some sort of underlying asset below it. So obviously you do not have this upside overnight millionaire dream, but you actually have an asset below it that gives you some sort of investor protection. So we do see a shift towards security token. I think there's a few issues around the security token as well. Number one being the transferability of these tokens, then creating a regulated environment to trade these security tokens, and then in general the infrastructure in Switzerland. I think we're very much going in the right direction to host such a very complex financial instrument, but I think we're going in the right direction, but it requires a lot more than just attention from a group of people from us. It requires institutional clients, the banks, insurances, all to take part of it, to foster education, that they really understand what they're dealing with, what is the token economics of a project such as this. And once we've reached this education, we can work together closely and foster this.
Well, we are going to be delving a little bit deeper into security tokens, but first I'd like to ask you, Ido, I understand that you decided to open your company in Switzerland, right? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and what the reasons that you had and how you, what you met when you did that?
Sure. So first, it's not a company; it's a foundation, and that's a part of the decision. I'd name four main reasons, and ICO is not amongst them because we did not undergo an ICO. We went through a private, very traditional private placement by VCs. The first one is clarity. I think that Switzerland has been the first to provide clarity, which is not to say that it is the easiest regulator. It is simply to say that the line is rather clear on what's legitimate and what's not. And I think that referring to Matthias' words about the raging 2017, that was extremely important, not only from a regulator perspective, but from an industry perspective. Being able to trace the very clear line and be on the right side of this line. So clarity was first and foremost. The second thing is communication. It is not evident that there is a fintech desk with the regulator, with FINMA, with whom you can communicate. You don't necessarily agree on everything, again, but you can communicate. I think that the structure of FINMA, and I'm sure that there are many people here that can describe it much better than me, but the structure of FINMA of having a fintech desk that is able to absorb all communications and then go and behind the scene communicate it with the various different departments in FINMA makes it extremely efficient in communication. So that's the second thing. The third thing is gravitas. So Switzerland is by all means not the easiest jurisdiction for a blockchain project. If one would go to Malta, Gibraltar, Liechtenstein, there are far easier regulations. But at the same time, if you want to build a serious project, a presumptuous project, a project that would really affect the way that people interact financially, and you want at the same time to provide a comfort to the participants of this project, then you're in a sort of this paradox of wanting to be under the regulator that doesn't want you. So wanting to be with the conservative regulator, but one that is willing enough to communicate and is flexible enough to understand the changes, and we found in Switzerland the optimal position to do that. And fourth is the infrastructure. There is possibility for financial partnerships, whether it's the banking system or other economic devices and partners, which are making it, and established, renowned ones, which is making Switzerland the perfect place for us. I'll just go with the fifth element, which is the foundation element. I think that many of the projects that we are engaged in, blockchain is probably the technology that touches the most upon sovereignty. Think just of the premise of issuing money. That's a premise that 10 years ago would be unheard of. And I think that doing it under a private incorporation mode, a company, is extremely presumptuous, and history has been rather consistent in showing us that private money fails. The concept, which to many blockchain projects sounds trivial, but it is not, the concept of a foundation that is owned by its purpose, supervised by ISA, which is another Swiss supervisory authority, where you have no shareholders, is a concept that allows to mitigate between the corporate world and the civic world in a fashion that is extremely flexible on one hand, but extremely supervised on the other. So these are the reasons.
Thank you. Okay, so I think one of the subjects that interests a lot of people around here and everywhere we speak about blockchain is the issue about security tokens. Now, there are a lot of questions that can be raised about this, starting from the point of view of the regulator in the United States that's thinking about considering all kinds of tokens as security tokens. And there are other questions about when are we going to be seeing projects that have to do with security tokens, the interesting ones. So this is kind of a question for all of you. If you could touch upon those points about security tokens, if you want to start, Catherine, with the questions about the regulatory side of it.
Well, I think quite often when we tell our clients that what they're trying to do is a security token, also from a Swiss law perspective, they first react with a certain anxiety, with a certain incredulous, but this is a utility token. So I think maybe we can start off with the Swiss side and then go to the international side. In Switzerland, anything which has to do with a platform which is not yet built, where you're receiving a token which gives you a future entitlement to do something on the platform, will be a security token. So that in itself doesn't have to make people afraid. In Switzerland, at the moment still, we don't need a prospectus for any security tokens except if they represent shares or bonds or are some kind of structured product. That's a special field. But other than that, a security token is just a security token. It's an entitlement to a future right in some way or to an existing right. The interesting thing about tokens is that they can change over time. So historically, if something was a security, it usually stayed a security until the right fell away, the company was liquidated and the share didn't have any value anymore. Now tokens can evolve. So you can at the moment have an entitlement to a future right, but at some point the token will be something else and it might just be a utility token. So the hurdles also for security tokens in Switzerland are not necessarily extremely high to issue. That will change over time when we have the new laws and we will need prospectuses for everything. The Swiss prospectus, again, is something not to fear. It is not a 300-page document. Having said that, there is this international element, and I think that is where things kick in. So something which is in Switzerland, a security token, doesn't have to be a security token in the other parts of the world. We have at the moment a situation where a client is setting up a derivative, which is a security token. However, the UK lawyers are saying this is not a security token under UK law. So it can actually also go the other way around. If something is not a security token in Switzerland, it doesn't mean that it is not a security token in other countries. And there is a country-by-country approach. So the fact that a Swiss lawyer says this is a security token or this is not a security token isn't predictive for the rest of the world. And companies have to be aware that when they're selling tokens, they are under these national jurisdictions, and they will always have to take care how to approach the different countries in their selling activities. So I think that is sort of the basic truth. Security tokens are not necessarily something to be frightened of, but there is a right way of dealing with token issues in general and understanding what the tokens are in the different jurisdictions.
Matthias, do you want to tell us, I'd say, when you expect to see more interesting security token projects, or if you're already seeing them, and what would be, I'd say, the common denominators of these projects? What would make them special? And what would a company need in order to do this, from your perspective?
Yeah, I think I have to take one step back towards utility tokens. The issue with utility tokens was that no bank, no other corporate company did really know on how to create a valuation of these companies. So they came up with some sort of price and then they sold them to people. The issue with security tokens nowadays, I see, is that everybody is frightened, everybody is scared of them because they contain the word security. And if you mention the word security in Switzerland, everybody is scared that they go to jail, basically. So with security tokens, we are currently running the first security token offering with a fully licensed bank, and this is quite a challenging and a very complex project because from a regulatory perspective, you need to somehow prove that you need to understand who are your shareholders at every given point of the business. You need to prove that these shareholders are either on the blockchain or in some sort of Excel spreadsheet in your shareholder registry. So this is an issue. And then at the end of the day, people are asking you, okay, what can I actually do with the security token? And currently, you cannot do anything with the security token because there's no liquidity. I mean, this is my understanding. Usually when I have questions, like difficult questions like this, I usually go to Katrina and ask her. But currently, you cannot do anything. There's no liquidity for security tokens. And the second question is, do I actually want to trade my security tokens? Because a lot of people in here are probably passive investors. They have their portfolio and they look at it in a few months. So what will be the volume of security tokens and how attractive will be the exchange market? Because currently Binance has a huge volume and they make a lot of money from just spreads. If you create a fully regulated exchange, like a lot of people in Liechtenstein are doing, where Liechtenstein, I would say, has a bit the upper hand towards Switzerland, because Liechtenstein, you have direct access, you have an EU pass, you have direct access to the EU markets, basically. So that's another issue that we're facing. I do see a lot of projects. I would say Q2, Q3, 2019, this will be the first time we see these exchanges. I'm very curious to see what the trading volume of these exchanges will be, if it actually makes sense to trade a security that frequently.
So that kind of raises a question. If there's no liquidity, why would somebody create a security token already?
I think it's a bit of a two-sided market problem that we know from many other areas, this chicken and egg. Why would I create a token if no one is trading it? Why would anyone trade it if serious actors are not creating tokens? And as with many cases, chicken and eggs are being solved with courageous big actors. So the first time that a big infrastructure project is going to be securitized and democratized to allow not only traditional financier of such project to access, then probably we will see higher trading volumes. I think it is really in the infancy, and one must say that in this very violent pendulum movement of the blockchain industry, we are probably in the more cautious time, as the industry has been served quite a high blow. I agree totally with Mattia that in the long run this is extremely positive, and probably the projects that will survive this are the ones that stand a chance at making a difference. So I expect it to be slow, but I think that as soon as major actors with attractive offerings, security offerings that could not have been offered in traditional markets are made accessible, then we'll see the volume rise as well accordingly.
Do you want to All right, okay, so we can move on to the next issue, which is kind of blockchain in itself, okay? Because we do know that if we look at blockchain as a technology, we're seeing some adoption of it. I'm kind of moving aside from the token side of it and looking into the I'd say the computer side of it, okay? We're seeing some adoption of blockchain projects, but not as much as we'd expect, or is it as much as we expect? What do you think should happen in order for blockchain to be more accepted or to become, I'd say, more an integral part of enterprises or big companies? I think you want it?
I think we have to start at the infrastructure level. So step one, you create a legal entity, so you need a trusted lawyer. Step two, you need a bank account. How do you get a bank account in Switzerland? Usually how it works right now, everybody has a friend of a friend of a friend of a small bank. They actually accept crypto. So that needs to change. So we need to start with educating the banks.
I'm sorry, I might have been misunderstood. I'm talking about blockchain itself, not yet the banking. I want to talk about the infrastructure because we're seeing some enterprises going into blockchain projects, but others are not, and the adoption in the enterprise world is kind of partial. So let's talk about that before we get to the next step about how the banks are dealing with it themselves. Is that okay? Okay, sorry.
The two are a bit connected, but I'll leave the banks aside. I will not mention the banks for now. Okay, blockchain infrastructure. We've had a lot of traditional players coming to us asking, how can I implement the blockchain technology? And I would say 98% of the time we tell them, I'm sorry, but it does not make sense to implement the blockchain infrastructure. And yes, the hype in 2017 was great because we all very much are passionate about the blockchain technology, but we have to be realistic that a lot of times the blockchain does not make sense at all. And it goes back to education. I think it's very good for everybody to take some sort of coding, some sort of Python or Solidity course that they really understand. Where does the blockchain start? Then I also see the problems. Hands-on, I see the problems, the scalability issue of the blockchain. And then everybody should really start to work on their own use cases. And then you need to, because the technology is great, but also from a legal side, the two are so intertwined, and this is what we as Verum Capital have started to realize, that the legal side and the tech side in reality are almost one. So before you don't understand this, it's very difficult to implement this. And I think it starts with education of corporates to being able to implement the blockchain technology.
I'd like to answer it from a slightly different perspective. I think that for blockchain to be adopted, it needs to vanish. It is an underlying technology. And no one asked with what hammer were built the chairs that you are sitting on. And blockchain is exactly this hammer. And if it makes sense to build chairs with this hammer, then you'll sit on comfortable chairs, and if not, it will be, no one is asking whether SNB is using Microsoft operating systems or Linux-based operating systems, nor should they ask whether blockchain is used or not. I think that blockchain is a technology that blockchain is no longer, it's a common word not only for the technology, but for a set of solutions of democratizing markets, of demolishing this dichotomy between being a customer and a citizen. But this is a much bigger paradigm to solve. Blockchain itself is just a technology, usually a rather lousy one. It is extremely inefficient by design. If it does not change the mechanism of taking decision, it makes no sense at all to adopt it. I've been speaking in the past 2 years with about 20 central bankers, always to face the question, what do you think about issuing digital blockchain-based tokenized currency? And my answer was always, I don't see, unless you're going to fire your monetary board in favor of my mother being able to take monetary decisions in a fork, then I don't see why you would need blockchain to tokenize your currency. By all means, you can tokenize it, but you want to do it centrally, because eventually blockchain is a governance technology. It is about decision making, and most enterprises and central governments are not wishing to decentralize their decision making, and therefore using blockchain is just like adding .com to your site 20 years ago in the premise of enjoying the buzz. So I think it needs to vanish. If it is to be successful, it needs to vanish.
Or maybe become not as, like under the surface.
Yeah, it is about the solutions, not about the underlying technology.
I'd like to very much support what Ido has said. One of the questions which we put to our ICO clients is how much of the money which you're receiving do you intend to invest into the front end, into the user interface? And very often that is a part which is not on the radar of the client. They're thinking of the blockchain, but they're not thinking of the user interface. And as long as you said, the mother can't start using these apps, it will always remain a very close community which thinks it's cool to be on a new technology. And I think that is where we have to go a step further.
Okay, we have only 4 minutes, but there are, I'd say, at least 2 subjects that are kind of interesting that I'd like to get quick answers for, okay? The first one is for you, Ido. That, in 2 minutes you could say, what do you think the regulators should do in order to make life easier for companies wanting to join into the blockchain system in Switzerland or in fintech? Or what do you think the next steps should be from that point of view?
So I'm humble enough not to pretend to understand all the entire framework in which the regulator works in. I think that in Switzerland particularly one recommendation would be to scale, because obviously Switzerland is very attractive, but therefore is swamped, and the SLAs are rather challenging. And the second thing is in partnership enablement. I think that clarity is required on the banking side as well. So setting the lines not only for the blockchain companies, but for the rest of the industry and creating the ability to work the entire chain, to easily open bank accounts, etc. I think it's moving in the right directions. The Swiss Banking Association has issued a letter. Yeah, that would be or guidelines, yes, which are extremely helpful. I think it's all together moving in the right direction. It could move quicker. That's always what the industry would say.
And I have a specific question for you, Matthias, because you raised the issue about education earlier. Okay. Now we said that blockchain should disappear on the one hand because it could go like underground, and on the other hand, we do want some education to happen here. So could you please expand on that and explain how you see things going in education? I understand that your company also has to do with that, correct?
Yes, education for corporates, but also education for the industry. I think these are the 2 vital elements. Number 1, for banks need to be educated on properly to run a due diligence on a blockchain company, because blockchain companies are always new, disruptive technologies. Token economics models are extremely complex. And banks need to understand how this works. So they need guidance. On the other side, on the industry side, companies need to understand banks. The head of compliance of a bank, he needs to put his signature on a piece of paper that you are not laundering money, basically. So the industry also needs to understand what the banks, what sort of compliance process, the step-by-step approach they have to undergo. So there should be, yes, working groups where the industry and financial authorities and politicians sit together and really understand each other's scenarios, each other's breaking points, because of course everybody wants to become faster and we want to implement the technology immediately, but we also need banks in a way to really drive this process forward. So we need to educate each other, help each other, and then we can take the next step.
We have time for one final question for you, Catherine. I wanted to ask about the challenges from the regulator's point of view with what's happening, and how do you see things moving forward with these challenges?
Well, I think what we've seen so far is fintech and ICOs. Those are things which we are dealing with on a daily basis, and I think that's going forward. We are getting more information there, that's fine. What has not yet been addressed are DAOs, and we are seeing now in our office the first 2 DAOs really come to life, where I think there will be a challenge for the regulator, because whom do you regulate? Which jurisdiction is actually involved? So let's say we release the DAO out of Switzerland and liquidate the company thereafter. Well, who can be taken into accountability for that DAO? And I think those are things for specific use cases. There will be ecosystems which will be created. Our cases are, one is in the assurance, surrounding assurance, and the other one is for payment systems, where we will actually have to discuss the question of accountability. And I think that will be a very challenging one, because at the end of the day, if you think it through, the only way to deal with it is by having some kind of global minimal standards, and I don't quite yet see that the international organizations are able to face those questions. That's going to be a challenge.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd like to thank everybody and all of our panelists and the audience, and of course the Swiss Embassy for hosting us and HFN. Thank you.
So we'll be back here in 15 minutes. So hope to see you back